Hello, my friends. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining. This is an Ask Me Anything Live, basically around your tech stack. So while people get in, while we have people joining us, I'll kind of explain to you the logistics and kind of the topic here. Someday I'm going to figure out how to pin the topic to the text here, like all those cool tic-tackers do. But I haven't figured that out yet because I'm one of those technology executives that doesn't know how to use new technology. So that said, show is on, popcorn is popping. I wish we had some popcorn. I've been, really on the popcorn train lately. Anywho, so the topic of today's live is all about your tech stack and looking at the diagnoses and the options around seeing if it's something that actually is, I called it trash in here. Is it actually trash? Do we have a strategy around it? And does any of that make sense for us to do? So I'm just plugging in my outline here so that we can see it. And from there, we can kind of go on. But this live, as always, is about anything you want to talk about, not what I want to talk about. So most definitely pop any questions that you have in the chat or anything like that, and we kind of go from there. But I always have an outline just so that we can, kind of keep on topic, and then more importantly, thank you for dropping the topic in the chat. So I'm personally a simple brands popcorn type of guy. Good for you. That should be something everybody's gotta have their popcorn. When it comes to popcorn, for me, I really like the buttery movie theater popcorn. One of my first jobs was doing events. Well, it wasn't a job. I didn't get paid. It was an internship in college. And I did large events for the Botanic Gardens in Denver. And we had one of a festival that had all popcorn type of big, massive bags. I remember we took it back. I went to Colorado State University, and they were like, here, they gave all the poor interns because they didn't pay us. They were like, here's all the leftovers of the popcorn. Enjoy. And so I took it back, and I didn't usually get back. It's a big drive between Denver and Fort Collins until everyone was already out partying. So I just brought this huge bag of popcorn with me to these type of things. It was always the most popular. It was either me that was the most popular or my roommate that worked at Olive Garden that brought the breadsticks. She probably wins that popularity contest. But anywho, go State, absolutely, always. Let's look at how we kind of create this vendor safe space in this conversation. And that's really the big point of this platform is my tummy hurts after eating Olive Garden, as it should, right? Because it's fake food. So they'll probably sue me for that. Another cease and desist I can just add to my collection. So, that's really what my job is here. So the thing that we need to look at in this conversation is actually what you're running. So drop your ERP system, drop your MES system, drop specific areas that you really want to take a look at. And that's what we can kind of diagnose in this process, because it's not so much about what your core system is. It's about how all of those systems connect to one another. And that's a big piece of looking at a tech stack is, do you have the integration competencies in-house? Do you know how your systems talk to each other, or do you rely on an outside third party to do that? A lot of times, we've seen clients a lot of times look at or be trapped into a vendor relationship because somebody owns their custom integration that holds their systems together, right? They didn't realize that when it was being built, but once they got too far down the road, all of a sudden, I didn't know I would, oh, awesome. Yes, please vent. I didn't know I was going to need to either never break this professional relationship and keep paying for it, or B, completely break my integration that I paid for, right? Those IP or intellectual properties, that isn't something that's really clear in the contracting unless you really dig in and read, right? How many integrations is too many? Totally depends on your system. The average number of applications or integrations that an SAP customer has is over 300. So as long as you can manage those, I think the issue is the misunderstanding of what is an integration. It's something that absolutely needs to be managed by your system solution architecture team, right? It's not something we just make and then we set it and forget it, right? So that's a big piece that is a misunderstanding. It's like, hey, the vendor or system integrator in a big technology implementation sets that up. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to manage this, and I didn't get any of that knowledge transfer because probably you didn't pay for their organizational change management services, which, is ridiculous just in general. But that's why we need to understand what integration competencies we have in-house. That is specifically important when we go into a conversation around things like AI or AI agents or data, which I'll get, to your question here in a second. But that is going to be absolutely critical to understanding how all of that is passed through, because integration is an integration. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, right? So that's a big piece of that. I walked in on a meeting where our master data said to an AI company rep, we don't trust our data. Oh, awesome. Then you definitely should not use AI. Then followed up, if we lay AI on top of it, can we ask questions about our data? I mean, sure, and it will give you bad answers, right? But that, I'm sure that was music to the vendor's ears. They're like, yes. And there's nothing wrong with using AI agents to organize your data, but if we don't know how it works under the hood, there's no way that we can confirm that they're doing things right. Like, it's like, I drive a Jeep truck. I do a lot of videos in there, right? If the Jeep truck makes a weird noise, I have no idea what's going on with it and need to bring it to the specialist. I'm completely at their mercy, right? So they say to me, Kyler, your transmission is completely broken. We need to replace everything in your car. And then I'm kind of like, how do I know if that's true or not? And that's the same thing in this conversation. We're talking about using data as a service and using platforms as a service. A lot of times when we have data and data mesh and bullshit like that has been a huge industry term. If you don't understand if you don't trust your data, that's fine, right? But figure out why. And that's not somebody else's problem to solve. You've got to figure out how to do that with processes. It sounds like you already know that as well. So at what point should you restructure your architecture? I would say that if your architecture isn't working anymore, like a lot of times, like system architecture has kind of been like a hot term in the last couple of years, and it's really not that fancy, right? It's how all of your systems work together. And I see so many times people wanting to re-architect their systems when their systems aren't broken, right? So there's nothing wrong with optimizing your architecture, assessing it, and taking a look at that. You should do that at least on a yearly basis, at least, right? A big overhead look. If you're a solution architect and you're looking directly at one system, you should know that system like the back of your hand and be able to tell, like when it makes a weird noise like my Jeep, that something's off. And you would have the specialist type of mindset to go in and diagnose it, right? The problem is the AI would probably misinterpret the data and make stuff up, and then we'd eat it up. And that fundamentally is the problem, right? It absolutely, there's no doubt about it. If you don't have your data structured, cleansed, all of those different things, it's no doubt going to make stuff up. I see AI make stuff up or hallucinate on a daily basis, right? It does it all the time. And it's because it's taking specifically, I work in predictive analytics AI. So specifically, it's absorbing that information that historically has been true, but it's not true for this time, right? The part is not in Bay 8, bin 6. It was, the last 3 months during this cadence, but it's not now. So now, using that AI, if the operator wasn't paying close enough attention to be able to rectify or look at, the building bricks of that answer, that to say, oh, it's not pulling from current data, it's pulling from historical data, then they wouldn't have the ability to do that, right? They'd eat it up is the fundamental problem with that. I'd say, do they trust the business at all, right? And too much trust in these systems is how you make really, really bad decisions. So that's, very, very scary, right? Let's see. AI is a toxic relationship that tells you what you want to hear and gives you the participation medals. That's so funny. We should put that on, a t-shirt or something like that. My AI participation medal. We should give those out with our "This is actually AI" stickers. Because it's so true. I mean, how many times have you had a conversation with some sort of Gen AI system where they're like, that's an incredible idea. I just saw that news story how like that dad was working with his kid, like fifth grader, on math problems, and ChatGPT convinced him that he came up with like a whole new math theory, and it was completely wrong, right? And he even said multiple times, please tell me if this is wrong. It's not going to do that because its goal is to have as much engagement in your life as possible, right? Like social media, algorithms, they're going to give you what you want to see. Let's see. I'm in meetings all day with people that make things up. Yeah, but at least they do it like in an entertaining way. But they absolutely make things up. So that's a whole nother quality assurance issue. I think technology can help with that too, especially if we're on a shop floor and we need, some sort of standardization of quality, because the quality coming from the day shift is amazing, but then in the night shift, it completely goes downhill because it's a whole different staff, and they don't know that the hum of the machine means, that it needs to take a 15-minute break or, so, okay, Oprah. Oh my, that's so funny. I'll get my Cricut going. Oh, Crickets. That's a really innovation piece of technology. I don't have one of those. I just would love one at one point. So the sales rep was giving anecdotal examples of a user that automated a process by using their AI. So was it a real example? Because this is so important, especially your tech stack is garbage because you bought the wrong thing. You thought it did something and it didn't. And so yeah, but it can also, but other tools like Power Automate that we actually understand how it works, like other tools can do that. And ones that we already have a subscription for, right? So why would we pay for two tools to do the same thing, right? So that brings me to a really good question about like what happens. I just did a video that showcased the 3 themes I see all the time in our restoration work. And one of those, when the tech stack is garbage, is that we didn't understand what we were buying. So let's dig into that like a little bit. When we're looking at buying software, and I don't care if it's like, use case specific or if it's a whole ERP system, we absolutely need to make sure that we understand what we're buying. I love when my clients have a pen test and don't understand their own tools. Life is good these days. Yeah, that's always fun. And I mean, some of my favorite meetings to sit on are like those assessment datas where they had no idea that they even had those systems. Like I love those audits because I feel like so many things come from those audits. You get to see like the change in behavior around budget, right? Like, why are you spending this much money? Does anyone even know this tool exists, right? So many have to use Copilot because they can't articulate the process well enough for Power Automate. Absolutely. And Copilot is the new kind of safe corporate AI, right? We've seen that a lot with our client community of like ChatGPT is out because it's not secure, and Copilot is in because it is more secure. And that totally depends on how you set it up, right? The other thing with Copilot is they're like, oh, everyone that has, a Microsoft Office account should absolutely have Copilot. It's like, well, no, that's not the case. And of course they're going to say that because they want to safe Copilot. Yes, please everyone believe this 100%, right? And I think it's weird, there's one thing about AI policy and then there's one thing about being completely unrealistic for people's lives, right? You can certainly lock down it within your own hardware, your VPN, all of those different things, but people are going to still utilize it. So it's more about educating your frontline staff about like what is secure and what's not, right? Let's see. How should you evaluate if you need a new ERP? Well, like you would evaluate anything else, and that always starts with what's wrong with it. Like, what's the problem? Is it because it's old and crusty and you hate it? Or is it because it actually functionally does not work for a core need that you have, right? And a lot of times people look directly to tier one ERP systems because that's how they think they grow up as a business. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Getting in a relationship with a tier one vendor is very risky in the fact that you're going to be locked into that. And that's a huge piece of what we need to consider, right, in these types of evaluations. So the first step is requirements, like what's wrong with it and what do you need? And that's an internal thing, right? And I think that's a huge piece of a missed conversation, because if you don't have your requirements like solid and you go to the vendor, the best salespeople in the world, in existence, work for SaaS companies. So they're going to fill that in for you. You don't want that, right? Because then you end up buying things that you don't need, a totally bloated system, or you have a mismatch, which is a lot of clients we work with, that down the road in 6 months, you're like, wow, I didn't need this type of support, but I totally need something completely different. We just did this with a client who purchased an ERP system. They actually needed an MES system, which is a manufacturing execution system, because of the complexity of their manufacturing systems. And that happens all the time, right? Let's see. Educating your frontline staff is one of the best security defenses. What's the best SASE solution? Do you mean SaaS or do you mean SASE? And tell me what the acronym stands for, so I know what we're talking about. Why does it matter? The security should only be a concern in highly confidential workspaces. I think security should be a concern in all workspaces, especially in an understanding of what does it mean to leverage OpenAI. And I think the Samsung case study is always a good example of that, because, those people that were trying to fix the code, right, were trying to do it in a way that made the most sense for them and to make them fast and efficient. Were they trying to give proprietary code to the OpenAI workspace? No, right? And so if they would have known that and been able to leverage it in a way that made their tool more efficient and give them that brainstorming opportunity, right? Do it with users, not to them. They will fake it to get you out of their day if it isn't for them. And I completely agree with the sentiment here. Building or doing requirements or building a system that you're trying to implement needs to start with those frontline users, right? It needs to start for them, and that's when the next question is, who should be writing your requirements? Well, absolutely, it should be you, the internal business. You can absolutely we help write requirements, right? But we don't sell any software. So we don't care what you buy as long as it's the right choice for your system. And, that's how we built the firm, is to not, take any financial kickback. So the purity of the recommendation is only dedicated to the success of the business. And I think that's a big misunderstanding in requirements, is writing it with your legacy vendor or writing it in association with an outside third party, which you just have to make sure that third party isn't going to bias, right, what your requirements are trying to do. And that, that's a big consideration for them, but it needs to start with the end user, specifically the ones that always are like, oh, that's not a problem for them. It's like, well, have you actually asked them? We've seen so many multi-million-dollar systems that have been implemented, and then the frontline users like, yeah, we haven't done it that way in 5 years. And they had no idea, and that's so unfortunate because that money is gone, right? Some study after study in cybersecurity disagrees with you. Let's see. Educating your frontline staff is one of the best security defenses. I would agree. Apparently case studies would not, but definitely show us those case studies so we can be educated too. As an internal staff member, I asked an internal staff member, when is the new feature going to be available? They said, I'm going to find the other one. We don't know. A vendor is working on a feature we asked and are paying for. What? I guess what vendor? Would that still be the same AI vendor? Because that's not totally weird. If they're working on a feature that's customized for you, you just have to make sure that you own that customization, not them, right? And that's where a lot of people get in trouble. So let's see, secure access service edge. I don't know anything about that. If you do, though, definitely drop your recommendations in here. It's not in my wheelhouse, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it if you have some recommendations. Let's see. Zero trust, assume frontline will be breached or bribed, defense in the depth. Where's the guy that was on our last live that hacks people for a living? I think that's so interesting. Or maybe you are that guy. He's like, I am that guy. But I definitely can show you the case studies. They are legion, even the recent runs. Definitely share them, please. Let's see. Island is a cool vendor. I like them. What do they do? That would be a girl. That's me. Yeah, exactly. You were so famous on our last live. We were like, that person is cool. So thank you for coming back. Now I'm not scared personally, but like we definitely would defer to you on that after all the knowledge that you shared to us. I think for us, we're trying to, and cybersecurity is not our wheelhouse. We would outsource usually to an industry specific firm if that was a necessary need. But it's always a consideration in those types of just core business systems. No, a different vendor. Nobody could give me a timeline on the feature currently being developed. That's terrible. I mean, that's incredibly scary. Because a lot of times they're like, hey, we have an issue, we need to bill more for this, and all of a sudden you paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for this feature that you had no ability to customize the timeline, or even like, we don't want that as bad now. Let's move it to something else. So I just give the CEO full admin. The problem solves itself quickly. I'm sure the business closes. Yes, but that's the problem. My manufacturing clients keep trying to bolt security on. So what do you think they should do, right? What do you think that they should do instead? So, but the problem is solved. It is solved in the fact that the business closes or everyone quits. Either one. It's up to the CEO. So, all right. Let's see. So I think air gap is everything, full security, no problem. Let's see. What else do we have in here? Oh, we were talking about ERP demos. I was on a thread and then I pulled it up. Island Enterprise Valuer, similar to Citrix, but not as ancient. Interesting. Cool. That's super cool. I'll check it out. Writing it down on my pen and paper. Like the grandma I am. It must be architected into the workflow. Assume breach, architect full solution with security. So do you have a certain system that you like most in that type of thing? Make them move data with floppy disk. I think that would be a good exercise for them, right? Just so that I'm glad we're moving away from Citrix. I think many people are, right? But it's kind of like that ServiceNow type of thing, or PeopleSoft, right? Where it never really actually goes away. It just kind of stays there until people figure out it's hard to get rid of, right? Let's see. You guys are going to talk about some Claude stuff that I know nothing about. So ground up with security, zero trust is a mindset. Extremely difficult to do with technical debt. So what do you think that zero trust initiatives should start with? Let's see. I like the assumption I like to build with the dummy system, as in some dummy will use it. Zero trust is first, and then restrictions on users are next, right? Zero trust starts with network layer. Does it? I don't know. We'll have to ask. But that's a good understanding. I think the interesting part about what you said is hard to do with technical debt. So do you feel like the older the system, the harder it is to secure? Or do you feel the opposite? The newer the system, the more openings in the more, integration agnostic or those types of things. I would love to hear what you guys think on that, because that's really, really helpful to kind of go over in that. So real quick, absolutely, the older, the more vulnerable you are. I don't know, securing an I-series isn't too bad. It depends on a few things. Old and new can be just on bad. What does it depend on? We've turned this into a cybersecurity live. It's my like cybersecurity course, right? That I'm getting from you guys. But I think, on that end, a big piece of that is like the mini red flags in this conversation, which are not from you guys, but for what organizations can do today, right? And so if we don't have any documented processes, but we bought that AI workflow, right? It's so incredibly important that we understand that we can't just slap those processes that are bad processes, and the AI workflow isn't going to work on top of them. Same with kind of the data example we leaned into earlier. So we're all learning. That's the point of this channel. And I always say, like, it really doesn't matter what I say. It's what's best for your organization, right? Let's see. How design was laid out in technical debt. It's really case by case, really. The longer something exists, the more vulnerabilities that are typically discovered, older systems that are not updated. That's so interesting. Can this architecture even support zero trust without a full refactor? And so what are, let's see, egress layers, IAM with privacy access, net segment, and maybe some request signing. Cool. We're going to have to take all of these and put them into something that we can potentially do like a video on and tag you guys, so that way you can access, because I think this is hard with these types of systems, because it is case by case basis, right? A lot of times. And that's why you kind of need this like diagnostic approach. Because a lot of people like to throw around things like zero trust. And it's like, well, can you actually achieve that, right? I don't think a lot of people know how to achieve that, right? How often should you be auditing your SaaS solutions? Like a full business system audit should happen at least once a year, right? At least. But when we're talking like an observation deck of like what's going on, or a dashboard, something like that, when it comes to these types of systems, we definitely want that to be, within the operator's daily routine, right? Let's see. The best is always to toss it out and start clean, but not a viable option or viable time. Yeah, I mean, so many, especially with like larger businesses, because I assume, the larger, the more incumbent the vendor, the more challenging that can be. But you let me know. I just started Travelers Europe, a senior architect on the path to become chief architect. Cool. What is that? Is that a system? Travelers Insurance. Let's see. Yeah, but over here it's more Lloyd's, aka London market, but have retail commerce. I am extremely lucky to start clean about 6 years ago. It's incredible. Sure, we have debt now, but it's my debt. So like how big is the organization? That would be a good question. So to kind of dig into when it comes to these types of case studies. I'll also be interested when it comes to these types of like architecting piece. Do you feel like there's talent in the market to find that internally for businesses that maybe have that ability? That was me. My teams, I put it on Do Not Disturb, and I feel like my teams is like, no, not for me. And then let's see, Kyler, think of cybersecurity as a castle and castle security, moats, drawbridge, guards, etc. That's so cool. I absolutely will think that. That's very, very helpful, especially for an analogy. In London market, it's hard to find architects for cybersecurity. So do you feel like that's something that you do locally? When it comes, and are we talking about solution architects? Just making sure, right? Yes, but inside the castle wall is where there's too little security. Should we do like a Trojan horse approach? So what would your castle look like? What would your cybersecurity castle look like internally? Like what would be some things that you would do for that immediately? So let's see. King Guard, spies through, out. I got you. This is just so cool. Let's see. How are teams thinking about systems in models like Claude? I don't know. That I don't know. So if anyone does know that, let me know. Thoughts on change management for ERP implementations, the veil, if you will. I think, if you followed any of my content, I hate the word change management because I feel like it doesn't effectively represent, and there's a lot of very shitty change practitioners in the marketplace. And that makes me mad, right? When they come in and they, do these weird like kumbaya trust falls of like what, especially like zero trust. We have zero trust and blah, 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 blah. And that's a big, consideration when you look at change management just in general. So usually there's some, especially in the bigger enterprises we service, there's some sort of change management department or something like that. But what has to happen in that is it has to be analytics based and it has to be baked into the project where we're measuring things like milestones through sentiments and things like that. It's absolutely critical, but I think just the core of like the standalone change management is changing, and that's becoming more of like a core technology strategy within the IT team, so that way, as with the modern IT team, right, goes from what they used to be like ticket order takers, right, computer fixers, they're in their cave basement, to something else that is being able to be a productive, not just cost center, but value chain in the business. And that's a big piece that we look at. So let's see. So I would love to know, like, for ERP implementations specifically, that's going to, it depends on, your setup. That's going to bridge the gap between, if you're a larger organization, the enterprise PMO, the Office of Project Management, and then also what you're actually getting and how familiar your team is with that system. So like if you're on Microsoft Business Central right now and you're going to D365, right, it's still a Microsoft product. But if you're going from Oracle to SAP, that's a massive change, right? So we're going to need to understand what those competencies are in-house. So extreme iron curtain, suspect everyone, curfews and restricted movements. Damn, that's a crazy ass castle. No particular system, just curious about system design. Absolutely, a bunch of no trust pirates. Can we get Jason Bourne? Absolutely. I'm always down for Jason Bourne. I try and get my kids to watch like those marathons with me, and I just feel like they're not there yet. They're 5 and 7, so they're like, this is not interesting whatsoever. But I have hope. Let's see. All right, so let's keep pulling on the kind of that. So we've got cybersecurity, we've got the change management thread. And I think the bigger piece of like when we look at that from a holistic strategy standpoint, we've got to know like what is the issue and what's the problem we're trying to solve. Is it everybody hates this implementation because we had a failed implementation 2 years ago? Or is it because we have no cybersecurity competencies in-house? So we really actually need to understand what that looks like from a security standpoint, especially if we're doing things that involve AI. Right? My favorite clients are clients that are put everything in SharePoint, have Copilot, but they think they're secure. Absolutely. What's the biggest consideration when upgrading any system? Integrations? No, right? First would be cost, in my humble opinion, right? So if we go into an evaluation, we're going to get a variety of different quotes from different vendors, right? And I'm talking typically private sector is where I work, right? Cost, then security. Fair enough. So when we get these different quotes, we're going to look at them and understand that there's going to be like millions of dollars in between these licenses fees. Sometimes you get what you pay for, but we've got to understand what the total cost of ownership is, right? So it's not just the license, it's, the maintenance fees, it's all of these different pieces that go in. So we've got to then dig into the agreements. And a lot of businesses get very, very impatient with this process, but it's a huge process, right? We have to know that we're essentially, am I in Miami? Absolutely not. But it is raining, which it never rains here. I'm in Colorado. And that's a big consideration when we're looking at those types of things, and what we're trying to solve on that problem. Let's see, we got cost and security. You've got to read all the contracts in that type of understanding to know like what that level of investment is, and do a whole analysis on like, are you going to be able to absorb that year over year in the subscription fees, right? So in Common Now, AI came in and SharePoint went out the door. Interesting. Cybersecurity is so many things: network, application, platforms, plus others. We need different people with tech skills to put that into practice. Absolutely. Kai sent you a message about ERP change, but you have to accept it. I absolutely will. We go through all my messages on Wednesday, so if you haven't heard from me by Wednesday, definitely let me know. I respond to all of the messages. It just maybe takes me a quick minute. So Copilot has made my X-File tests so much easier. Is that X-Fill or X-File? I don't know. That's cybersecurity lingo. Let's see. Does it matter if everything in SharePoint versus OneDrive? I honestly don't know. I would say it matters very much from like a business system example, but I don't know if you're asking about security or that. So let me know. Let's see. My company is about to use the fields function in Salesforce. How user-friendly is it? I think it's pretty user-friendly. I would love to know like what industry you're in, but I think that's a good function to utilize. I think Salesforce in general is a challenging system to have a relationship with, but from a user interface standpoint, it is very effective as long as it was designed right for what they need to use it for. So as long as your team designed it, not just Salesforce, right? Let's see, I got accepted into iOS development Apple internship. That's awesome. Very congrats. Let's see. OneDrive is slightly safer due to not having one Copilot access all OneDrives. Interesting. There you go. See? Let's see. It's not too bad, but you must design it first and then implement. See? Right? Exfiltration. There we go. Let's see. So yeah, that's a big consideration on that. OneDrive is safe because it constantly logs me. Yeah. My OneDrive is super secure because I can never find it no matter what. And my assistant hates me for it, right? She's the one that actually does the job. I don't know where anything is. So, yeah, that's a big consideration in those takeaways. I think a lot of it is in the tech leadership gap. You know, a big conversation we have in, at least for my clients, is a lot of like, and I can only understand like how terrible it must be for cybersecurity, but even in like the basic understanding for tech leadership and understanding like what a CIO knows or what a CMO or a CDO knows or a CTO, I think those are really challenging, like especially if you have a very legacy system that might be vulnerable, but you explaining it to a 60-year-old executive is very challenging, right? Not because they're dumb or stupid. They just didn't grow up with this type of technology in their everyday workforce, right? Let's see, our company is a security company. We sell and install high-end security cameras. Very cool. In the age of vibe coding, people are not using security architects to build system. I enjoy this. I bet must make your attacking. Tell the execs about our cool castle. Actually, that's probably why I would start, because they can always, there's always like a invite only, right? I think Chris should do comedy on the side for sure, because this is hilarious. But also, I think they relate to those types of different analogies that are incredibly simplistic, because they don't know what we're talking about. And that's a big consideration in your overall technology strategy. And if your tech stack is actually trashed because your leadership team doesn't understand what your team needs to support it. And again, like talking through cybersecurity, I can only imagine what that looks like. Also, in using like the field service function in any CRM system, like what are you trying to do with field service? Because it can be very limiting depending on that. Like, in manufacturing, we absolutely need to be able to have that traceability factor. And that's a lot of times why we, axe SAP in those systems, because they don't have very good traceability for the level at which we need. And in all seriousness, I think about understanding it in real world parameters. Absolutely. Lots of great ideas after that, which need to be adjusted digitally, right? And culturally, I think it needs to be understood by the organization or the ones that need to. And I also feel like, it's a veil that needs to fall down. Like we can't do cybersecurity. We need somebody else to do it. So that's a big consideration for that type of conversation. I think another one, right, is the time it takes, right, to be able to implement these new systems effectively. We live in this world that wants this instant gratification, right? Especially with AI, right? And ChatGPT and prompting and all the Gen AI stuff. But when it comes to a lot of these bigger core systems that need to be replaced, even change management, especially contracts, that's very, very, very slow, right? And especially the bigger the organization, the slower it is. We have a client the other day that was being pushed towards, hey, I need this contract signed. I got you guys a 5% discount, right? And that vendor was pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And finally, we with the client said, like, this is $1 billion organization plus. Like, we don't do anything fast. And a lot of times that's how I see these tech mismatches, is because we rash bought something that we didn't understand, right? Kyler, professionally, I want to tell you that you may want to closely partner with the security architect. That's fine. But personally, I don't ever want you to do that. Yeah. That is so true. I mean, I think as, we look down the growth of our firm, I'd love to see cybersecurity competencies in-house. The way that we operate is we have employees and then we have 1099s. So a lot of times if we have like a very security conscious type of client or industry, we bring in one of our 1099s that is either configured that security is for the specific system that's being implemented, or in that way. So that's a big way in which we kind of execute on that level. But yes, very, very true. I would be curious too if you feel like the bigger SIs have those security competencies in place. Like Accenture, Deloitte, PwC, CGI, all those different ones. Do you feel like they have the ability to flag that type of security risk? Because they say they do all the time. And I always am calling BS on that one. I mean, my entire job is in calling BS on big system integrators because they, just constantly lie. Like I feel like they would make so much more money if they didn't. But that's just, my biases in that conversation. So I would be curious if you think that. Just a thought, insurance is regulated, so have a security and architects in place with governance. Yes, definitely. So, and security is one of those things that's incredibly complex and hard to fit an ERP system. So, we have a client now that, we're looking at essentially what they could utilize in insurance. I think it's incredibly nuanced, where a lot of times the general ERP systems don't fit that type of industry because of the complexity that they need, right? Let's see. That's hard to know without pen testing them, but they probably provide tools clients don't use. Could you hack Accenture or Deloitte? Like, what are you doing over here? That would really help us. No, I'm just kidding. I'll get in trouble for saying that. What else is new? Let's see. Oh yeah, I certainly have heard of U.S. travelers. We have someone in the same sort of space as them, and I think when they asked us to look at their project, it was interesting for us because we were manufacturing nerds, right? So we don't do a lot of those types of services, but what we found with these types of clients, especially in like the financial circuit, I think was it last year I was named like top 10 fintech consultant, which is like hilarious to me because we don't really work a lot in fintech, but we do specific pieces in which the complexity is the level at which we operate, and then the restoration services, right? Restoration services are so expensive when it comes to a failed implementation, you bought the wrong software, right? All of these different things that your tech project or your IT department is in trouble, and then we have to do that. So I could, if they pay me, if you're good at something, you never do it for free. Amen, right? Let's see. So I think that the bigger part of this conversation, and I love the security aspect of it because it's so important, but it's not clear to everyone. And a lot of times it sounds like, right, based on what you're seeing, it's a really unique path to what, right? Same with, core technology strategy is everyone's strategy is completely different, right? So again, as I always say, it doesn't matter what I say, it matters what's best for your business, but you got to be able to figure that out without getting taken advantage and gobbled up by the industry. Does a system have to handle all of an organization's complexity to be a viable solution? Should it cover over 80% of the complexity? No, absolutely not, especially not in the modern day and age. I think when you're looking at an ERP system, you really you need to look at all of those different pieces that go into what an enterprise resource planning system does. But a lot of those are going to be like module based too. So if you need like Salesforce field services, if you need an additional piece of that functionality, that they'll build that out for you. But that's often why people say like ERP is dead or things like that, because businesses have become so specific in certain industries that they absolutely can't fit within an ERP system. They need something else, right? So whether that be like, a service-based system that they need to be able to look at, an IT management system, a warehouse management system, a front-end CRM like Salesforce is, all of those different pieces. But until you actually know what you need, or at least have an idea of it, then the first vendor you're going to talk to is going to convince you that their system is the answer, right? For the most part. I would say, I've had vendors many times pull out of demos and things like that because they're like, this isn't really a good fit for that. And I really respect them for that. Because I do think that I'm more likely to call them back because I feel like they were honest with what they were selling. If a vendor is acting a fool in demos, I'm going to do everything in my power to never talk to that specific sales rep or that vendor again, right? So it would depend on the area, right? You have a vendor build it out, custom code, or plug or bolt on. Yes, for the most part, right? We just have to know who owns those and how much they cost, right? How often do you revisit core architecture decisions versus letting the system evolve? I think, as the system evolves, there's milestones that are core architecture decisions, right? So we need to make sure that we're aligned with that and we have an overall understanding, right? There's not enough characters in this chat. We'll send a message for sure. But the chat does suck about that. Like, I just don't know why they do that. But then, of course, like, I get like novel comments that I have to like pull apart. So some parts of me likes it, but I still think we're like a little too short, especially for us in here, right? And so my answer would be, it totally depends on like what you're trying to achieve. So say you have, a 30-year-old green screen, which, not a lot of businesses have, but they do still very much exist. And you have, an AI obsessed CEO that's like, we need AI, we need AI. Your architecture is going to look very different, right? Then, maybe the same revenue-based, same industry-based company that bought a new ERP system 10 years ago and now is trying to put a warehouse management module on top of that, right? Insurance has lots of green screens. Oh, my gosh. It's my nightmares. Let's see. Should I let the vendor customize to cover that gap in complexity from baseline configuration? Mick, are you rage baiting me? Like, what are you talking about? No. You can certainly let the vendor customize certain things in collaboration with you, right? But we're not over customizing it so that we bend the system till it breaks. That isn't what the system was made for, right? It's like, me putting on a sweater and cutting holes in the front and being like, why doesn't this sweater look like the way that I bought it? Well, because you cut holes all over it and now it's, a piece of trash. So a lot of times we're customizing things into trash because that's not how the system is supposed to operate, right? So if your system's not there, you need to look at what your requirements are in your processes to see if you can somehow meet in the middle. But if you can't, you're going to need a new system, right? As an aside, we're seeing a lot more C-suite deep fakes to social engineer employees and accounting. That's so interesting. We need to put like a voice, one of those like kidnapper voice things over you so you can tell us all the stories, right? Let's see. I'm 40. I coded RPG and green screen for 10 years after graduating. I'm 42, so awesome. Working with a vendor, taking our on-prem MS CRM to the cloud with MES Online. Are we the last to do that? You're probably close to last. No, I'm just joking. How big is your CRM, right? And how big of an organization are you? Because no, you're certainly not the last. But I would say I'd rather be the last than the first, right? So just think about it that way, because a lot of times they've worked out a lot of the kinks that we go into. So let's see. Vendor will look for their interests, not yours. New SAP system. Who is? You have a new SAP system? Let's see. What's the best software enterprise platform for AI in your opinion? It's going to be like a non-answer, but I don't think enterprise AI is a good idea. I think the way in which you operate AI should be business unit based so that especially like networks of agents or things like that have the ability to work within that data lake or that data pool. So for example, if we have, AI agents that are everything to everyone, right? That's a big piece of that needs to look at how effective are those agents, right? So I would much rather have agents that are responsible for our human capital management system, right? And then also agents that are responsible for our predictive analytics. So that's the way that I would look at that. I'm also a big believer in you creating your own AI if you have those competencies in-house, right? If you're a big enough business. Let's see. Please don't say that to SAP. SAP, they hate to see me coming. They always have, right? Our entire career, we're frenemies, right? Let's see. 250 people, 30 million revenue, CRM and biz talk log and chat, data migration. I think that's fine, right? I don't think you're the last to do it, right? In any way, shape, or form. So as long as, that you're aware that we're not just lifting and shifting, right? We're looking at things in there that can be fixed and cleansed and processes that can be better utilized when it comes to that type of data migration, cleaning that data, and then we have a plan for when we drop the data in the cloud, how we're going to keep it clean, right? Copilot, put all your crown jewels into SharePoint, give all your users access. He's rage baiting now at this point, or she, I don't know. What are your thoughts on the SaaS apocalypse? Is it right or overblown? I think the SaaS vendors certainly think it's something that they're experiencing because of just the lack of funding that they've gotten out of Wall Street, right? Because so much of that capital has gone into AI. So I think it's not overblown for them. And I think they're going to have to start listening to their users. And that's not something they're used to, right? They're used to dropping the platform, collecting the licenses fees and saying, I hope it works for you. And that's just not what people are buying anymore. I mean, look at this conversation in here. We've talked about MES, warehouse management, CRM, human capital management, ERP, right? We've talked about all of these different systems that essentially we don't have to just use Oracle anymore. So we're probably small pot fry compared to the clients you have. No. Our clients are usually enterprise level, but we also work in complex manufacturing. We're definitely a boutique firm when it comes to system architecture because that's just what we're good at. But I mean, that's a good size organization. I definitely think it's something that is a good move for you guys, right? As depending on what you're running for ERP, if you're running D365 or Business Central or all that. Let's see. Sorry. Trying to get software against people. What does SAP stand for? Well said. If you don't lift and shift but evolve, the business functions are okay. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. If you want a general AI strategy, do Google or Microsoft according to G Suite or Copilot. I think for generative, that's fine, right? Depending on how large your organization is and the security measures, but we'll have to hear from our security experts. Let's see. If you want to build real value, build it from scratch. If you can work it, right? I think that's a big piece. If the SaaS vendors weren't so darn expensive, it wouldn't happen. I completely agree. Or continue to charge people 20% increase in maintenance fees throughout their 3-year contract. That's insane. That's insane money, right? 100% on the data cleansing, but our data team is lazy and are fighting the change. And I always say when we have someone who's not engaged, that's a data point, right? That's going to show you where that implementation is going to get in trouble if they're not coming to the table. That right there is more than I even need to interview them because that's going to showcase an issue. A data team can't be lazy, and it can't just be the data team, right? It has to be the data owners, the stewards, all of that type of stuff. So also SaaS will stay where it's at. At an enterprise level, tools aren't ready for scale yet. I would agree with that, depending on what that looks like. So we're using Claude and AI, and we build layers around it to access internal data and systems. This is uniquely dangerous. Boom, right? Hi, Kyler. Just wanted to say I love your content. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for supporting my content. It's about you guys and the message, not so much about me. It seems we have come full circle. On-premise become popular again. Thoughts? I think on-premise is a great solution. It's always something we evaluate, right? But you have to know that you're going to a different model. You got to have the cash and capital to be able to invest in something like that, which you should have anyway if you're looking at a SaaS solution, because they're not less than on-prem solutions. They're not, right? It totally depends on the situation. I think they are more secure. I think they are, they let people be able to own their technology strategy better, but it's not something that I could say it's always going to be better. It's not. We've seen a lot of people go back to on-prem, right? But is that going to be good for them in the long run? It depends on their industry, right? Let's see. Your content is so good. Oh, thank you. I appreciate you guys. Really, I do. It's not always good to build your own in every instance. Absolutely not, right? We don't build our own cars. That would be crazy. Could we do that? Probably, right? But there's car people that are better than building it. We don't build our own castles, all right? No, we let the castle builders do that, right? But we monitor where we want our rooms in our castles and our kitchens in our castles, right? Let's see. let's see. This is such good information. I really appreciate all this. I do have to jump here in just a minute at the top of the hour. Across, let's see. So next live, real quick. You guys are so cool. I don't want to go. I think multi-tenant cloud will take a hit from SEC perspective. I agree with that, right? Let's see. We are a native startup, ENT platform, ex-leaders, form, companion, any advice gaps. I would need more information on that. If you message me, I'll get back to you. I have imposter syndrome as a PM, and I use your content to sound smart. Well, I appreciate that, but I'm sure you're just as smart as I am. And being a PM is a really hard job. I just had a call with someone, that I met off of TikTok that's in charge of, a lot of different things. Being a PM is the hardest job. If I have a very difficult client, the first person I'm going to select is a PM, right? I have imposter syndrome too. I've been writing code and designing systems for 40 years. We all do, right? We all do, right? So that's not an unusual thing, especially in, the technical world where, it's always our fault, right? So anyway, my friends, you don't, right? No, not our hacker here. He doesn't in his castle. Anywho, my friends, I have to go to my next meeting. But we will be having our live on AI versus reality. I hope all of you can come at the same time on Thursday. And then we also have our LinkedIn Live on Friday mornings at 11:30 a.m. Thank you for the gift. The first gift I've ever sent. Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. That's very, very kind. I really, really appreciate that. I really do. This community just means so much to me. And just the what's your LinkedIn? At Kyler Cheatham. So yeah, we do a LinkedIn Live. They're kind of, a little bit more boring and delivery focused, but it's a fun way, to engage on that platform as well. So start a live and we'll continue our chat. Absolutely. I totally get it. A lot of people I talk to are under NDAs. So no need. I'm just here to, to listen if you need anything, but I appreciate you guys. I'll see you next week. You have a great rest of your day. Really appreciate all of the information here. So